Hello, welcome to CRPS Contender, my complex regional pain syndrome education channel. Today's video is It's All Coming Up ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. This video is part of my Narrow Mind Till the Soul Begins to Break, CRPS, a biopsychosocial developmental disorder. During this series, I will be discussing my personal hypothesis as to why I think CRPS happens and how to deal with it based on that understanding. Okay, let's hop right into the content here. I'd like to open this video with a quote, which I know I don't normally do, but this quote really just sums it all up very nicely, and you really couldn't ask for a better source. This is part of the abstract of a report published by the Harvard Center on the Developing Child in the official journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And the quote says, "Advances in the fields of inquiry as diverse as neuroscience, molecular biology, genomics, developmental psychology, epidemiology, sociology, and economics are catalyzing an important paradigm shift in our understanding of health and disease across the lifespan. This converging multidisciplinary science of human development has profound implications for our ability to enhance the life prospects of children and to strengthen the social and economic fabric of society. Drawing on these multiple streams of investigation, this report presents an eco-biodevelopmental framework that illustrates how early experiences and environmental influences can leave a lasting signature on the genetic predispositions that affect emerging brain architecture and long-term health. The report also examines extensive evidence of the disruptive impacts of toxic stress, offering intriguing insights into causal mechanisms that link early adversity to later impairments in learning, behavior, and both physical and mental well-being. The implications of this framework for the practice of medicine in general, and pediatrics specifically, are potentially transformational. They suggest that many adult diseases should be viewed as developmental disorders that begin early in life, and that persistent health disparities associated with poverty, discrimination, or maltreatment could be reduced by the alleviation of toxic stress in childhood." Now, in this report, they use the term eco-biodevelopmental. That is the same thing as biopsychosocial. Okay, I'm going to try really hard to keep this video under 15 minutes. Might not happen, but I'm working so hard for it, guys. Let's talk about adverse childhood experiences. There are 4 major categories of this. When the original test was done, there were 3 major categories, but I am going to use the broader definition because I think that is more accurate. So, they are abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, and community adversity. Let's talk about abuse and neglect first. Abuse is when something that is not supposed to happen does happen. And neglect is when something that is supposed to happen does not happen. Abuse can be physical, sexual, or emotional. Now, emotional abuse can be a bit of a not well-known style of abuse, although it definitely is growing as far as awareness goes. But what does this mean? This means psychological abuse, verbal abuse, intimidation, manipulation, gaslighting, withholding affection as punishment, the silent treatment, isolating you from friends or family, shaming you, constant criticism, and controlling behavior. Neglect can be physical or emotional. Again, that's that psychological style. Household dysfunction includes a parent with a mental illness, parents who are divorced, and I'm going to broaden this to include parents who should have gotten divorced but remained married, domestic violence, substance abuse, an incarcerated relative, and homelessness. And then a bit of a broader context here, looking at the community, where you're located in your community is a very important aspect of your environment. This includes being a witness to violence, being discriminated against, whether that's a race, ethnicity, a sexual orientation, a gender orientation, a religion, or another related sort of thing like that. An adverse neighborhood environment, community disruption, being bullied by your peers, having lived in foster care, having poor housing quality and affordability, being in poverty, having a lack of opportunity, economic mobility, and social capital, and intergenerational or historical trauma. Over 2/3 of people have experienced at least one ACEs in their lifetime. but the more ACEs that you have experienced, the greater your risk for negative long-term health outcomes. Let's talk a bit about toxic stress. But before we do that, I want to talk about epigenetics. You all know that DNA is extremely important. They contain our genes. Whichever genes are active shape who you are and your biology. Epigenetics is life experiences and environment changing which genes are being expressed and are affecting the biology. This means you aren't changing the genome, but you are changing the phenotype. Changes in epigenetics are heritable, so you can pass that down to your children or have it passed down from your parent to you. There are 3 major types of stress: positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. Positive stress is a brief increase in heart rate, having intensified focus, a mild elevation of your stress hormones that is then quickly brought back to a safe and secure disposition. Tolerable stress is serious but temporary stress responses that are mitigated by positive buffering influences or relationships. Toxic stress is intense and prolonged activation of the stress response systems without positive buffering influences or relationships. You can see down in the lower right corner here, the left image is a healthy neural development. The right image is how neural development looks under the influence of toxic stress. You'll notice there are a lot less connections there. Toxic stress is the term that has been coined that describes the extensive scientific knowledge about the effects of excessive activation of the stress response systems on a child's developing brain, immune system, metabolic regulatory systems, and cardiovascular system. When toxic stress is not properly addressed and reduced, it can lead to long-term behavior issues, health complications, and diseases caused by ACEs, including smoking, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, missing work, a lack of physical activity, severe obesity, diabetes, STDs, HIV, broken bones, cancer, stroke, heart disease, chronic lung disease, depression, other mental illnesses, being more inclined to experience domestic abuse, and more inclined to attempt suicide or commit suicide. Again, there's more than that, but generally, there you go. Okay, I'm going to try and speed this up, guys. I'm trying really hard to keep this short. Toxic stress affects 4 major pathways in the brain. The first one is your stress pathway. That makes total sense, right? This means you are having a dysregulated HPA axis, which is your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and decreased hippocampal volume. This leads to depression, anxiety, impaired memory, and impaired learning. The next one is emotional processing and regulation system. This means you have decreased gray matter in your prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is right at the front of your skull, like right above your eyes. This is the one that involves social interactions and executive function and being able to regulate yourself. And an increased amygdala volume. Remember, your amygdala is in your limbic system. This is the area that responds to fear. This leads to hypervigilance and reduced attentional control. The third area affected is evaluation of reward. A decreased reward response in your ventral striatum leads to anhedonia, which is difficulty experiencing joy and pleasure. In CRPS, you've got a dopamine dysfunction. Dopamine is the motivating neurotransmitter. It is associated with addiction. It isn't the cause of addiction. But when you're lacking dopamine, you're having a much more difficult time with being motivated and feeling reward. And the last one is brain connectivity. The disrupted pathway between the amygdala and your prefrontal cortex decreases the activity in your default mode network, which is the multiple areas of your brain that work in a network together, that when you're just kind of resting, you're not trying to do a task, when your brain is just kind of going on in itself, that's your default mode network. You could associate this with your ego. That is not proven yet, but that is a hypothesis out there. That definitely, this needs more research. This is a fairly new area of study. It also increases the activity in your salience networks, which leads to difficulty understanding situational relevance and how to respond appropriately. So, you might say, well, that's less than helpful because I can't go back and change the past. Yeah, I experienced a lot of ACEs, but it's done. It's over. I can't do anything about it. To a point, that's true. What we want to do here is mitigate the effects that the ACEs bring about and cultivate resilience. So we want to reframe the question a little bit. We don't want to ask, what's wrong with you? We want to ask compassionately, what happened to you? What did you experience in your life? It seems like a small change, but really quite massive. Resilience is the ability to recover from and adjust to misfortune, disturbance, or change. There are 7 core concepts of building resilience. Competence, which means understanding your skills. Confidence, which means having belief in your own abilities. Connection, which means the ability to build a support system for yourself. Character, which is the sum total of the attributes that you possess, including the existence or lack of virtues. Virtue just means a strength. This would be something like patience, or empathy, or courage, or a sense of justice, or generosity, or ambition. Those sorts of things. It is also the ability to differentiate between what has been distinguished as proper and improper, and being able to determine that for yourself. The next one is contribution to the well-being of yourself and others, which also increases your ability to ask for help and rely on other people. Coping with healthy strategies to prevent dangerous quick fixes to stress, which means preventing emotional outsourcing, which leads to addictive behavior. For people with CRPS, I bet a good portion of you, if my hypothesis is correct, were adrenaline junkies. And you might have acknowledged that within yourself. Or perhaps you were really into soothing yourself with reckless behavior, or whatever it was that made you feel better when you were not feeling good. So we want to make sure we are using healthy coping strategies rather than damaging ones. And the last one is control, which means being able to make your own decisions for yourself. While cultivating resilience, you're going to want to be able to identify your emotions, acknowledge them and be able to hold space for them and just sit with them without judging them, and being able to express them appropriately to other people. You want to be able to problem solve and work through your traumas or events that trigger your trauma, and notice how those traumas or triggering events affect your behavior and impulses, and whether or not you should act on those impulses. Some healthy habits that can assist with this is meditation, mindful awareness, physical exercise, which can look different for everybody, diet, and sleep routines. And I will get more into those later, but I didn't want to leave you with like, oh, that's depressing and there's nothing that can be done about it. So I'll talk more about this later, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview there. Okay, so we talked about the Harvard Center for the Developing Child in the Journal of the American Association of Pediatrics on biopsychosocial developmental disorders and toxic stress. We talked about adverse childhood experiences, including abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, and community adversity. We talked about toxic stress and its long-term effect on health. We talked about which major brain systems are affected by toxic stress, and we talked about cultivating resilience and mitigating the effects of the ACEs. All right, that is everything for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what I am producing here and you would like to support me, my Patreon is listed below. You are welcome to share anything I produce on this channel. As always, relevant sources are linked in the description. I hope you learned something today, and I hope to see you next time.